Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon again. I hope you've enjoyed the session so far. I hope you've got to have a little bit of time experiencing our virtual conference facility through Swapcard and spend a bit of time in the booths. We've heard a lot already today, and naturally, we're now going to follow on with a discussion which will form in three parts. We're going to look more deeply at the green bond market and particularly, of course, how it applies to European sovereigns. We want to talk a little bit after that about digitalization and how that might impact bond markets generally and what it means for sovereigns as well, particularly in light of potential things like central bank digital currencies. And then we'll wrap up the day. We'll talk a little bit more about the future of European sovereign debt. We'll bring in some of the things that were discussed in the first panel and what we heard from the European Commission and also from Siegfried Rühl as well. And obviously throughout this, if you want to post a question, please do. We'll try to accommodate as many as we can during the course of the next hour and 15 minutes or so that we're with you and on this panel. So I'm really pleased to be joined by four great guests for this panel. First up, Maria Cannata, who is a member of the Consiglio di Esperti at the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Italy, and I dare to say a doyen of European sovereign debt management, Maria, if you don't mind me saying so. So it's great to have you with us. We have Georges El-Hedary, who is the Group Managing Director and Co-CEO of Global Banking and Markets at HSBC, one of the biggest lead managers in this area. And great to have Georges, both his experience of debt capital markets, but also how debt capital markets fits into a broader investment banking franchise today, which I think is an interesting point. We also have Christian Wellner from Finanzagentur. He's head of strategy there, obviously very much central to Germany's borrowing programs. And in a bit of a nightmare for any moderator, we also have another Christian. We have Christian Koch from Union Investment Group, where he is the head of fixed income. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us for this follow-up session. I'm going to start by just asking the two issues with us. We talked a lot earlier about green bonds, both in Siegfried Rühl's conversations, and we talked a lot in the panel. We heard about UK's plans and some of the reasons why Portugal maybe not such a big issue of sovereign green bonds. But maybe I can come to Maria first. Maria, you launched, I think it was in March, Italy's first green BTP. It was obviously a landmark deal for the markets. Maybe you can give us a little bit about a bit of information about your experience of that and what you learned about the green bond market for sovereigns going forward as well.
Yes, thank you. So it has been quite an intense work to prepare this issuance, and the decision was taken after quite a long period of analysis of the Italian budget, public budget, and to understand how it was possible to be comfortable regarding a proper monitoring activity after the launch of the bond, because this is the most delicate part, especially for a sovereign, and this is a particularly important. It was particularly important the decision to perfectly respect the ICMA principles and trying to be as much as possible in line with the EU taxonomy, even if there are some parts of the EU taxonomy that are almost impossible to be adopted by a sovereign. Indeed, it wasn't even by Germany, that was the first sovereign issuing a green bond after the publication of the draft of the taxonomy. In particular, what is very critical is the standard criteria that has been designed clearly, thinking exclusively to a company issuer, not for a sovereign, and even from the EU that is following the same scheme of the sovereign issuers that have already approached this market, but cannot meet with the characteristic of an issuer that have not a single project to follow and being responsible for any action of them, but have to spread the money in areas that are large and that it is not all in the hands of the issuer to control perfectly. So After this analysis, we decided that we published at the end of February the framework together with the second party opinion released by PGO Heritage. And the week following week, we launched the bond. The response of the market was extremely positive. We received more than 80 billion of demand from 530 investors. So this was, I believe, the top record in terms of number of investors that participated. Large part of them, quite a significant part of them, were also completely new because they were very dedicated investors in green assets and part of a large portfolio of larger investors that have dedicated more and more a part of their portfolio activity to this kind of assets. The final issuance was 8.5 billion under a framework that allowed to have up to 35 billion. But the decision was not to exaggerate with the size of the first bond. On one side, because the allotment of the proceeds is quite an intense work that is still running, and but we wanted to be more than 100% certain regarding the capability of properly monitor the usage of these proceeds after the issuance, and also to leave some space for another issuance in the second part of the year. Differently from Germany, the Treasury decided to start with these bonds, but not to commit itself for building a curve. This for two reasons. First of all, you know that also the European Commission has a large program of issuance of green bonds, and Italy is benefiting for quite an important part of the Next Generation EU contribution, and we wanted to be absolutely certain regarding to avoid any possible overlapping, and it should be better to be prudent in not expand too much our part before knowing all the details in what would be financed by the Commission and what would be financed at the national level. Nevertheless, there are areas that are not covering the same kind of expenditure. So I believe that the Italian Treasury will be able to have a quite stable part of this financing that could be covered with this kind of bonds, even if we have to also be careful regarding in avoiding a double counting.
Yeah, well, those are some issues I think we'll come back to later, Maria, including the frameworks as well. But I mean, for now, thank you for that. I mean, it obviously sounds like you've left a lot of pent-up demand out there. So when you choose to come back, it looks like investors will be keen to buy. Christian, I think John, my colleague earlier, characterized Finanzagentur as being a skeptic to start with about issuing green bonds, but you've certainly drunk the Kool-Aid now. You came recently, I think, with a 30-year deal as well. Just talk us through your own experiences of the process to coming to the conclusion that you should issue them, and then the strategy that you have in the green bond space.
Yeah, but first of all, let me send my congratulations to Maria and the team for their very impressive inaugural green bond and entering the stage. Welcome to the club, Maria, and Italy. And Okay, I know how great is the workload you have to do in front of such a first transaction, putting together all the framework, selecting the appropriate spendings. Maria already mentioned that. So yeah, congrats to you and the whole treasury team in Italy. Yeah, as you mentioned, in Germany, we just occupied the third point in our curve in May. And already mentioned, building up a curve is one of our key points in our concept. And yeah, you were right. Especially me, to be personal, especially me, I was very skeptical about entering the market as a sovereign issuer. This does not have to mean that has to be done very much to save the planet. Full stop. Fully agreed. But what is the point that government issuers can provide to that movement? And that was a tricky question and a very interesting question, which puzzles us a little bit. I mean, yeah, Maria already mentioned you don't have one business model or one project. You have thousands of them. You do not have for if you compare us to corporates, you don't have a balance sheet if you compare us to a bank or a KfW or whatever you mean. And therefore that's a really a big question. How to what can we do to provide some more into the market with this already done? And our answer was we are having an established approach to our market as a benchmark issuer in the government field. So and therefore I just have technical questions. Can you see me right now?
Yes,
hear
we're
me?
good.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll move on. I cannot see you, but nevertheless, that's. I try to fix that later. And at this stage, we tried to. The idea was to copy as much as possible from the established market approach, from the conventional established market approach into the new green bond world. And it was what we tried, the twin bond concept. And part of this is building a curve relatively early and relatively easy. What is the reason for that? The need of curve is there's still an imbalance in the market. Anybody is going to grab green bonds, and the question is, but the investor base is very, very heterogeneous. So if you're talking about central banks where green bonds are a big topic, they're more interested on the short end of the curve. If you're talking about pension funds, which also is a sustainable business model per se, they're talking about the long end of the curve. And the idea was, well, let's give them best of we can do from our benchmark issuance in the conventional yields, and therefore coming to that approach, where we said in German law there are possibilities, in the budget law there are possibilities to support the liquidity of the bond in the secondary market by our traders here in the finance agency. So we did the copying as much as possible from the conventional side into the normal side. Besides one topic, it's just the volume horizon you can issue, because the volume is limited. So there's much more in the budget. I mean, perhaps there's a question coming, why do you not issue more? There's much more in the budget, but as Maria also mentioned, we're very careful about avoiding double counting. There's much more already blocked for NGEU, and we have the climate protection fund and things like that. So therefore, this is a tricky question, and we thought it would be the best idea to start into the market. Copy paste, never change a running system or a winning team. It's for the sport people outside, and we try to do that using the tools we already have in place in our secondary market activities with supporting the liquidity. And yeah, we were very happy about that. From our point of view, it was very successful. We did already both mechanics of coming into the market. We did also an auction as well as two syndicated transactions. So therefore, we were very happy about finding that the levels, and also very happy that all the investors who bought the German green bond at the primary market had also seen an outperformance in the secondary market as well.
Thank you, Christian. That's interesting. You certainly pick up a few points that we'll come back to later. Let's get the investor view now from Christian Koch. Were you one of the 530 that bought Maria's green BTP? And what do you think of the evolution of this market from an investor's point of view?
So absolutely, Maria, you must have seen us in the book, no? We're one of the lead investors in this market segment. So thanks a lot for inviting me to speak on this very distinguished panel. I'm very, very grateful for this invitation, and a little bit, also unsure to speak with such experts now on the topic. I'd like to say a few words on Clive on the demand side from us as an investor, and then on the supply side. So from the demand perspective, there's always been a demand for sustainability-linked bonds in one way or another for decades, really. I mean, we've had that from the church banks that we cater to in Germany. But really, the market for sustainable investment has really taken off after the Paris Climate Change Conference in 2015. That was sort of the birth, or the rebirth, if you wish, of the green bond market. And the ESG criteria that were developed, in that context, they became the center of attention for investors. Investors do want to play a big part in financing the shift to a sustainable future with their own investments. And if you look at the market, we've had more than 900 euro-denominated sustainable bonds, the majority of them green bonds, issued in total for a total market cap of north of 600 billion euros. And what's very impressive when you look at the development of the market is that of those more than 900 bonds, 342 were issued last year alone. Yeah, so you see this massive explosion of the market. It has reached more than 600 billion at the end of last year, and we expect another 75 billion of green bond issuance in 2021, and that is only taking into account a small amount of issuance from the European Union. So once the next generation EU issuance kicks off, we will see a lot of green issues and a lot of green bonds coming to the market. And I'm very happy to say that the European Union on a global scale is the most important issuer, and EU issuers are the most important segment of that market. We have more than 50% market share. We've done a little analysis of ESG issuance around the world. More than 50% of the market share does come from the EU. The second largest component comes from supranational issuers. And then you have a lot of smaller issuers out there. So Europe is really leading the way in that respect. And another element of the development of the green market is, I think, important. This market was very much developed on the basis of principles that have been developed by the private sector, by ICMA in consultation with the official sector. It was sort of a consequence of the idea of launching green bonds that came up during the Chinese presidency of the G20. And ICMA has risen to the challenge and has developed green bond principles, which now have become globally accepted principles. So I think it's a wonderful example how industry experience can cooperate with issuers in creating a novel market. Yeah. I personally think that there is a lot of future, a very big future for the green bond market. In the past, it's a market that has been dominated by institutional investors, by pension funds and so forth. But we now have the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which the European Union has put into practice, which means that from 2022 onwards, financial advisors to retail customers all across the European Union will be required to inquire about the sustainability preference of their retail clients. We've done some test interviews here with our retail clients. Turns out that 60-70% do want to have sustainable products. So there is a huge demand from society for those products, and therefore they will need to be supplied. And I think that we will continue to see a development where that demand from society will have to create its own supply. If you allow me one word, Clive, the other question, we've been in conversations on these topics over the years in Mexico City and in other ventures. We've been speaking at different conferences, including at the Bundesbank here in Frankfurt. And Christian Wellner said that the sovereign does not have a balance sheet. maybe we can talk about that aspect a little later. I would tend to disagree.
I'm sure we can. I want to bring in Georges now. Georges, obviously, as an investment bank, you sit between the supply and the demand. We're hearing that the demand is very, very, very strong. We're hearing the supply is going up, and I'm guessing it's not yet anywhere close to meeting the demand. How do you see this playing out? And also, just in terms of what I said when introducing you, this is obviously you manage a number of different businesses. How important is this sustainable finance and green bond business to a bank like HSBC?
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Clive. Well, first, indeed, our role as a book runner and lead arranger becomes so much simpler when you have so eager issuers and so eager investors. So it's an amazing place, obviously, to be in this space. If you allow me, first, on your first part of the question, Clive, I'll zoom in a little bit further in some of the details that Christian was giving vis-a-vis the overall market, and look at the sovereign ESG market in general, which is really what we're talking about here. Between 2018 and 2020, this market has doubled every year in size. So today, the sovereign debt in ESG format accounts for about $142 billion worth out of the overall $600 billion that Christian was talking about. Now, if you look at May 2021 compared to May 2020 last year, that increase is more than 140% year-on-year increase of issuance by volume. So it definitely shows you an exponential growth we haven't seen, in any market at that stage. Just a kind of a quick over kind of look at how it's comprised. European sovereigns today account for 80% of the outstanding ESG sovereign bonds. So Europe remains by far the leading issuer, certainly Germany, Italy here, France as well. France actually leads with about 36 billion of green bonds outstanding. They're followed very closely by Germany, 17 billion, Netherlands, Belgium, around 10 billion. Obviously, Italy, Maria mentioned the 8.5 billion issuance. And the upcoming Next Generation EU program, of which 30% of the total 750 billion over the next 5 years, 30% of which will be in green format. So clearly Europe is leading the way. Latin America comes next with about 12%, Asia Pacific with about 8%. Hopefully we will start seeing or counting the US among the issuers in this space at some stage. But that's obviously with the new administration and the new policy on green. So that is the issuer market and how fast it is growing. If you look at the investor market, and the kind of the colleagues, if you want, of Christian on the investor side here, we've seen the AUM for green bond funds, and I'm talking only green bond funds here, increased by 80% compared to year-on-year between this year and last year. That's 80%. It's still starting from a small base, kind of dedicated green bond funds, but certainly that growth is telling. In comparison, the growth of the overall bond funds AUM year-on-year was only 4%. So this is the kind of the pace at which we're seeing increased demand. What are the main challenge here? And this is, this is only green bond funds. So if you expand it to retail investors who are, kind of looking, for green investments, you look at private banking investors, you look at general funds who want to have a green component, etc., that number will be, massively bigger. Where it stands today is the equation is still biased towards more investor appetite than available issuance. And therefore, we're still, running around looking for, kind of issuers, sovereign and obviously non-sovereign, looking to kind of come into this market. There are two hurdles really they're facing today. The first hurdle is the availability of assets. We can discuss about that in a minute as well, but the availability of eligible projects, eligible, if you want, spending that will go towards green. And that's obviously, that's the first challenge, which is restricting, if you want, the overall issuance capability. The second challenge, which certainly the issuers here have overcome, but for some new issuers they have yet to overcome, is indeed how to ensure that they have the right metrics and parameters, and follow up in being able to issue green and kind of track it and govern it as such. So where is, kind of HSBC, us among, other peer book managers, arrangers, we've pledged, and I'll put just this out there, we've pledged first to be carbon neutral in our own operation by 2030. So that's our own commitment to green. We've pledged that our financed emissions, so the portfolio of client loans and assets we have in our books, to be net zero by 2050. And we've pledged that between now and 2030, we would support our clients' transition into net zero or transition towards net zero for an amount of up to $1 trillion over the coming 9 years now. And that $1 trillion is either financed either from our own books or through the capital markets. And that's exactly the green bonds and other ESG related bonds that would support clients to kind of achieve a goal towards transitioning towards net zero.
Thank you, George. Let's just come back to the frameworks for a second. Maria, you explained you spent a lot of time coming up with the framework. Christian, you've done the same thing. We heard Robert Steeman earlier from UK DMO doing that as well. How, if you could get to the point where there was an accepted common framework that everyone could agree with, Maria, would you be happy to rip up your own framework and just say, let's adopt a common one because that would assist the market? And I'll then ask Christian the same thing.
Oh, the selection of category expenses for building the framework, it has been partially also conducted together with the working group, within the working group with the European Commission. So we exploited this possibility in the framework of a major project for the green development of Italian investments. And we also benefited for this kind of support suggestion. And we decided also to give a look to previous experience for other sovereigns, in particular France, I believe, has been quite relevant, but also other issuers like Belgium, Ireland, and so on. And we found that in our budget, state budget, there were 6 categories that will cope very well with the ICMA principles, and we have afterward also another fruitful interaction with the provider of the second party opinion, and we were able to build a framework that was quite appreciated by the investors. So we accompanied the launch of the framework with a presentation to investors, one with multiple participation and a series of one-to-one with some relevant investors, and we have been able to also collect information elements that will be useful for the reporting that has been planned to be annual, and to make a good allocation of the proceeds of the bond. Absolutely, the framework is crucial and extremely important for the success of a transaction.
Can I ask Christian Koff? I mean, when you're looking at the Italian Green BTP, are you reading the framework? Does that have any bearing on whether you buy or not?
Of course we do. I mean, we read all of those frameworks, and when we find a situation where we have an element, we see that there is greenwashing, we will not buy. I mean, to give an example, we did not participate in the green bond issued by the Republic of Egypt, because we felt that the use of proceeds were basically for public waste, for public water management. There is a lot of waste of water, wasteful usage of water, and we did not want to fund a dysfunctional public entity with a green bond. So we look very closely at the framework and also at the use of proceeds. And there I would like to commend the Finanzagentur for having issued a very comprehensive report on the use of proceeds of their sovereign green bonds. I would though say, the challenge that we face today is not really the framework. I mean, as investors, we're used to analyzing things, and we will continue to analyze things. The challenge is the lack of supply. Yeah. And, for me personally, my children are growing up now, and I'm having a lot of very difficult dinner conversations when I come home. Yeah. Because there's a lack of progress in really achieving the necessary targets in decarbonization. Germany has issued 739 million tons of CO2 equivalent into the atmosphere last year, and is due to take that down to 562. And I'm afraid that with the public expenditures that have been earmarked so far, this target will not be met. I mean, if you look at the German budget, there were 12 billion of green bonds issued last year. This year we will have 14 billion. There was a 30-year bond earlier this year. There will be another 8 billion of a 10-year bond issued in the autumn. That will take issuance to 14 billion. The demand could easily be 60, 70 billion, but Christian Wellner cannot issue because in the 600 plus billion of the German federal budget, there is only 14 billion earmarked to green investments, which is shameful, I have to say.
Christian, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, this is because I have to reply that this is not. There are 40 billion earmarked for a green bond issuance, but there's much more for green expenditures in the budget. Therefore, I would completely disagree. And of course, the goals are ambitious. Full stop. I fully agree, Christian. No point. But as already mentioned, I mean, issuing this bonds, and the question, why don't you do more, is something to find a balance on that. I mean, when we come to discuss, doing this framework is a really very interesting exercise. Making multi-ministry working groups and put them all together. And anybody came in and they were all motivated, what I can tell you. And then somebody came out and said, well, we have a super project where we can reduce CO2 by reducing fossil usage of the thing. And then, then they came up to discussion. So, well, yeah, reducing CO2 is good, but we don't want to explicitly have usage of fossil energy into our framework, because you have to find this balance. I mean, this is really a tricky question. Doing good things, you have to have a standard. That's for clear, and that's the reason why ICMA is, I would say, so good to orient on that. But the question is, there are much more good things outstanding or outside which you cannot put into the framework. And I can give you an example, which is perhaps could be fine with ICMA, and we're just analyzing if it's fine with EU taxonomy. But what we can do, for example, as a government is a key sector for us, and we're totally convinced that investing in research, innovation, and academic research is a key for the success in fighting this tremendous reduction we have in front of us. But it's tricky to put that in an impact report and say, well, we have some academics, we have universities putting spending on that. How many tons of CO2 does this reduce, this investment? So this is a very tricky part at the level of government issuers. And therefore, that's a reason why. And I would agree. You can always improve. That's for sure. The point is, there are political discussions. What I can say is, they were all very motivated, but we have a very much longer list than we have on these 14 billion. And nevertheless, having 12 last year, that you suppose 14 this year, but having also already set aside the expenditures for NGEU is a growth which is a double-digit number in percentage.
It's a slightly unfair analogy, but does the does the fact that NextGen EU say it's going to issue 30% of its bonds in green format put more pressure on someone like you or another European DMO to sort of at least come close to matching that, which obviously at the moment, for reasons you've described, you're unable to do?
First of all, and I mean that perhaps we can come to that to come that later for the do we have a balance sheet or not? It's first of all, it's a political issue. I mean, we're living, for God's sake, we're living in democracies where the sovereign is deciding how to put money, and the sovereign is represented by the parliament, and it's put into the budget law. So first of all, it's a political decision how to transfer the money flows and the outcomes. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you talk about Germany is, I would think, the only country who had put the goals into a law. It's written in law, and you're German as well. I mean, you know that if there's a law in Germany, we try to do everything to be compliant to the law. So therefore, again with the last efforts coming or the last signals coming from Karlsruhe, perhaps there would be much more pressure. But this is the political point of view, and as debt managers, we're trying to find this balance, having a huge list of good things we do, but on the other side, we have some kind of standardization, EU taxonomy, ICMA principles, and investor needs and demands, and we try to put that together. And that's as it is of now. We all hope that the numbers will grow. Full stop. We also hope that, for example, as Germany coming to the market, we we send a signal to the market, not only to other issuers like Italy and now UK, the colleagues from UK as now, but also to other issuers, depending on pricing. So if Germany showed that it is could be attractive to invest in green projects and issue green bonds as well. So this could be the starting point for new issuers coming into the market, and that's what we all need for saving the planet, because the goal is undebatable.
Thanks, Chris. And just come back to you here. I mean, on the supply side, obviously you have a team looking at this, not just in Europe but around the world as well. What are your thoughts on how we can actually get the supply to meet this demand?
Yeah, very interesting, Clive, and I'll probably pick up also on a little bit the debate that just took place. First point really I wanted to share is it remains really our strong view that the market needs standards, it needs a common taxonomy, and that's probably the only way to avoid differing interpretations of what could be deemed green and not green, and and obviously the risk of greenwashing, but equally the risk of being totally hardcore green and not allowing or not accommodating for projects that take us toward that journey. So I do think as an intermediating kind of entity between issuers and investors, but equally for our own. If I said, we committed HSBC to support $1 trillion, up to $1 trillion worth of financing in the next 9 years, it needs to be on a tangible, commonly agreed, transparent, credible basis that we're able to evaluate ourselves and we're able to evaluate for the benefit of our investors the quality of our issuers. So I think the necessity to have standards are very important. And as it stands, the EU green bond standards cover practically more than 90 or 93% of the EU greenhouse gas emissions economic activities. So it's quite comprehensive, and therefore we like it. And we like the fact that it creates a benchmark, it allows for transparency, it allows for comparison. Whether it evolves, etc., we will obviously work along, but the idea is, I think there is a definitely common need to look at things from both angles. The second point I wanted to share is, I think that's also equally important, is that we really look at green as a journey that we quote unquote label transition finance. So when we work with our clients, we don't turn them off on the basis that they're green or not green. We don't think that is the right approach for the planet. When we work with our clients, our approach is to help them help themselves transition to become net zero at some stage, or on whatever, on their communicated timelines, and give them the banking services, the financing services that we can support them in to achieve that transition. So, for example, in emerging market, Christian picked up obviously on the issuance of the Egypt sovereign. We think this is major to see sovereign in the Middle East region, which is more used to fossil fuel kind of dependency, start build experience and build awareness, if you want, for the concept of green. And while you can always say this is transition finance from probably a quite detrimental position, it's still taking us and them in the right direction. And we would do the same for any emerging market country that is kind of getting or building aware. And let's not forget, the green concept was born many decades ago in the West. It was initially a Western concept. It has become, and it is certainly scientifically, a planet-wide problem. But it is very important to bring along all parties, if you want, to that journey. So, when we supported the government of Indonesia to issue their first green sukuk, it's again towards ensuring that the awareness is building and that there, kind of more proactivity in building transition journeys. And I think for the moment, we would like to look at it this way rather than totally hardcore green, and if not, we turn off. Because if we turn off, then we create a separate finance kind of activities, non-green, and probably never drive the incentive, for many of these players to move towards.
Thanks, Christian Koff, I'll come to you in a second. We've just got a question from the audience to George, actually, from Kay Chung, which I think you've gone some way to answering, but just to put it straight to you, does HSBC give priority to sovereign issuers who commit to net zero by 2030, as opposed to some who did not commit yet? Does that a factor at all in your business plans and on what you bring to the market?
So I wouldn't use the words that have been utilized, but HSBC is certainly working with all our clients, sovereign and non-sovereign, to ensure that for those of them who are carbon emitters, that they do have a journey, that we feel the journey meets the kind of the expectations from COP and Glasgow coming soon. We will probably also have a little bit more kind of tangible initiatives and commitments that the governments will want to follow, and that therefore that all our clients are able to meet those tangible commitments, and we will support them in that journey. And that's an effort we will do with all our clients. But indeed, if there were to be any client that decidedly wants to ignore that journey, then it is very likely not going to be able to remain a client of ours, yes.
Okay, thank you, George. Christian Koff, you wanted to come in at this point.
Yes, I wanted to underline what George has said. I think a very real danger that we're facing as the market is moving towards green and sustainable finance is that emerging markets are left behind. Yeah. So, and we really need to avoid a situation where, because of their green credentials, we only invest in Norway and Switzerland. Yeah. So as investors, it is our task to take money where it is scarce. And that happens to be in emerging markets. So George, I fully agree with what you said, the idea of transition and the idea of going along on the journey and helping those issuers on their journey. For us as investors, this is a fine line, because we also need to avoid the risk of greenwashing. Yeah, we need to preserve our own credibility vis-a-vis our investors. And this is why from time to time, we do need to exclude certain issues. We do not want to exclude, but sometimes we just have to do it. Yeah. But our sort of goal is very much aligned with what you said, going along on the journey and helping the transition, and only investing in green entities and entities that are 100% green today already is not going to help us achieve the decarbonization goals. So if I may just add one sentence, I actually think that the green bonds, the sovereign green bonds, are a great instrument that allows us precisely to channel money to entities which otherwise would not be eligible for us. Yeah, because we have a bit of a control over the use of proceeds. and that allows us to invest in places where otherwise it would be much more difficult for us to invest.
Thank you, Christian. I want to just turn it around quickly onto the issuer relationship with the investment bank. I noticed that the IFC now have a scorecard for their proposed lead managers, where they look at the bank's overall ESG policies, and that takes some account. They take into account when deciding who their lead managers are. I wondered whether, Maria, you were thinking about doing something similar, or whether you take anything like that into account when you're selecting your lead manager group.
Regarding the selection of lead managers, we have first of all looked at the track record that they had in conducting a similar transaction, but also we have looked at the commitment that they have showed in adopting for the bank itself a policy that is favoring or privileging green investments, but also the commitment they showed in, for example, organizing conference events and so on, where this type of care, concern regarding the environment was important enough. And indeed, for example, we selected 2 bank arrangers with a major role than the rest of the book runners that were the first, that one in a European context, the other in the Italian ones, were very committed since several years ago in this kind of activity. So it is something that we have considered and cared.
Thanks, Maria. I just want to, we could take up all of our time talking about green bonds. Just to wrap up this section, Christian, you've done a green bond auction. You mentioned that one of your deals was by auction. We've seen most of the deals coming out so far in syndication, and obviously that's been working in terms of building demand and so forth. But as yield curves build, and particularly as I guess the EU will build a very strong yield curve in this area, do you think that issuers will move away from syndication and move more to auction in this space?
Good question. I don't see any trend. I mean, this depends on the issuer. I mean, Germany has been used for many years in issuing huge amount of volume in auctions, and we use the tool of syndication only. If it comes to completely new products, for example, the new linker, the inflation-linked bond, or something like that, or the dollar bonds we did 12 years ago or something like that. So this is a very exceptional points for us. I mean, there are other issuers who are using this tool on a regular basis. This is completely depending on the issuer, I would say. And Germany is using the tool as well when it comes to very extremely high volume, because when you look to the volumes per ISIN of the 30-year conventional and or of the green, then you can issue more volume on a syndicated basis. So this is but at the end of the day, I mean, we started our calculations and our ideas and our analysis about the concept before we had this COVID-19 crisis. So therefore, to be honest, the twin bond concept was designed especially to copy as much as possible, as I mentioned before, from the conventional side. So it was standard. The standard is it should be able to issue that as well as in an auction. And then COVID came, and we had some discussions, and the volumes exploded to be funded, and therefore we decided, well, in cases of high volume needed and to be funded, we use the syndication tool, and in combination with that, there is a new product, that new 10-year was last year, that it was clear that we used that tool, and we used it again with the 30-year transaction, where we were able put a large amount of money into one bucket. But I don't see any trend coming from that. It was dependent from the issuer, and it will be dependent from the issuer as well.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I think we need to move on to part 2 of our discussion. We've already used up more than half of our time, and that's on digitalization of financial markets, where many of you here today would have seen the EIB deal, I think, with Societe Generale, which was done through the blockchain. We're all wondering, what does digitalization mean for capital markets, sovereign bond markets in particular? I think, Christian Koch, I think you were in some way involved in the EIB deal. Maybe you could tell us your thoughts on that and your experience of that, and also from an investor point of view, where you think this is heading.
Yes, it was a test case using Ethereum, the Ethereum platform, with the software that had been developed by Societe Generale. Goldman Sachs was another one of the lead managers in that transaction. It went very smoothly. We went through the entire process chain at Union Investment, including the custodian, administrator, back office, middle office, and so forth. And we were able to settle that without any problems. I think it's a promising development. To me, frankly, I have a little bit of uncertainty still, and maybe colleagues can help in that respect, how counterparty risk will be dealt with in the secondary market. Now, in the primary market, I don't see an issue. I mean, all the settlement process worked very smoothly, but there may be maybe George can elaborate a bit on that, but I really don't know how the counterparty risk will be dealt with. It's not a delivery against payment in Euroclear, but you have to make a cash transfer, and then you make an entry into the blockchain, and there's a logical segment between the two. And I personally don't really know how the counterparty risk will be dealt with.
George, that's something that HSBC thinks about all the time across the bank, but certainly in capital markets as well. Maybe you could address Christian's point, but also your broader view on where this will go.
Sure. So we've been indeed involved. So we haven't been involved in the specific EIB issuance that Christian was mentioning. We've been involved actually with the Singapore Exchange and Temasek, where we worked on a platform called MarketNode, which is kind of a different platform to Ethereum. We did an issuance on that platform. The initial one with Olam International, a Singapore-based corporate, and then we did 8 issuance subsequently, including Singtel, for $1 billion in a digital format, 123 investors. So we've kind of treaded ourselves a little bit on that platform. Now, kind of specifically on Christian's point, today, if you want to remove the settlement risk, the best solution we have found, but I do know maybe Finanzagentur and Deutsche Börse, etc., are working on other possible outcomes, but the one we have found is that you end up having a digital currency, against it to exchange. That digital currency in this case was an HSBC issued dollar, right? It's a stable coin by HSBC for dollar. So you're doing it then literally delivery versus payment, because you're exchanging exactly on the same platform, the same time, 2 digital assets. One is dollar backed and the other one is a bond backed token, if you want. Now, very quickly, that brings the discussion of, well, then a digital HSBC dollar is specific because to HSBC, but then if any other bank want to do the same, they'll have to issue their own digital dollars, and you start having a plethora of what is called stable coins, which is very undesirable. And this is where central bank digital currencies come into play, or can come into play and save the day, to have a digital asset that is central bank backed, that is totally acceptable for all parties and not kind of labeled with a bank name. And that could be used as a mechanism on that platform to remove the settlement risk.
Christian, Velna, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're thinking on this. Obviously, as a Finanzagentur or a DMO, you are close to central banks as well. I wonder whether you also have discussions with the central banks about, if there was a central bank digital currency, what would be the implications for our sovereign debt markets and what would be the implications for you? Maybe you could sort of like take us into that room and tell us what the discussions are.
Yeah, the discussion is very interesting, because there's a way in between. I mean, it's pretty clear that the pros are on the asset chain side, or all this clearing side and back office and things like that. So there are the points, and two colleagues mentioned the points how to deal with the currency side. We already had indeed a successful test with the Bundesbank and the Deutsche Börse. When issuing a test, it was just a test. It was not a real issuance like EIB. But it was a successful test of having a digital Bundeswertpapier on the chain, and doing the cash side not via a digital currency in a chain, but doing it via a so-called trigger chain. So the idea was, we have an already established cash management system with all and we use the chain to trigger the cash payment out of this. So this was the idea of something. Yeah, I would say it's some kind of hybrid model, doing the assets on the chain and doing the cash management on the real world, if you want, but triggered and secured by processes that can be controlled within the chain. So this is this was a successful test, and we're looking to the markets where the development is going on. I mean, ECB is having a huge project that will be very interesting. What they're coming out would be on that side.
Maria, are there similar discussions in the Italian Treasury at the moment?
Not yet. My colleague, my successor, is monitoring this kind of possibility. There have been in Italy some also analysis conducted by the authorities, because looking in particular at the EIB experiment, what seems to be very crucial is regulating such a kind of process properly, because for sure the fastness of the execution and the possibility even for the authority to have immediate clear information regarding what the deal is conducted, who are the players and so on, is very valuable. At the same time, the owner of the algorithm have as such a large delicate role that can be also sort of a concentration of activity and responsibility that needs to be very careful, monitored and regulated also, because we have seen in the past the discussion regarding the central counterparty concentration and risk, that there is the risk that the risk is too much concentrated in big central counterparties. In this case, if the model would expand, there will be even a major and important concentration in the hand of the owner of the algorithm. So this is quite a delicate point. The Italian authorities and the Treasury are looking at this test, but it is really too early to understand all the consequences and so on. And the secondary market aspect also is quite important. If for the primary market it could be also represent an increase in the opportunity and benefits, in the secondary market the picture is more uncertain.
Okay, thanks very much. Christian Koch, you were looking to say something, I think.
Yeah, just two brief comments. First, I fully agree with Maria that we need proper regulation in order for this market to develop. Now, in the case of the EIB bond, it was governed by French law because the French legislation came out before the German legislation, and it's part of the Banque de France central bank digital currency sphere. And we looked at the legislation, we had it checked. Linklaters was involved in the transaction here, and that was very well written, I have to say. And the second comment I'd like to make is that custodians and administrators need to move into that sphere now. So we were quite lucky to work with DZ Bank, which was very competent in that respect, and they fulfilled all of our requirements. But I think it will be a piece of work for a number of other administrators.
And Georges, I mean, if these hurdles can be overcome, if the issues, the regulatory issues and other issues can be overcome, this could be transformative, probably, I mean, particularly in, say, secondary markets where liquidity has always been an issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Clive. You know, the kind of the value that this new initiative can, it's a major unsettling unsettling to the current ecosystem, but it brings major benefits with it if established, standardized, and rolled out, you know, widely, and obviously with the right rules and regulations, as Christian was saying. So you can have quicker settlement processes. You can have, you know, faster, you know, and also lower cost cross-asset transfers. You can have 24/7 liquidity. You can have all peer-to-peer type possible exchanges. Ultimately, will be lower cost also for the issuers, you know, to go into that platform. Custodizing it and asset servicing of these will be easier on the platform. It'll give easier access to retail. I can go on for some time, but there are a lot of benefits that come with it. But we still see a few major hurdles that need to overcome. And the first major hurdle, obviously, the legal and regulatory backdrop, you know, again, kind of echoing what Christian was saying here, but it's very important to have a framework that you're safe in it. The second major hurdle is agreeing on a standard technology, because the last thing we want is a fragmented, non-interoperable technology where, you know, you end up having lots of small initiatives and really nothing picks up and gains scale. You know, the earlier we can kind of collectively, issuers, investors and arrangers in the middle agree, possibly with regulators, central bank authorities, etc., on a, you know, on a protocol on which we can all, you know, agree and set it up on the, you know, it'll go faster. And the third major hurdle is for all these players, the major investment, technology investment, etc., setup investment, you know, to be ready, to be able to, you know, to be able to offer it at scale. And I wouldn't underestimate that requirement, because we're so heavily invested in the incumbent kind of ecosystem of payments and of custody, etc., that it's a major initiative. So I see this more as a 5-10 year horizon, but the work has to start today. But in the future, it'll be obviously a materially more easy to use, cheaper and safer access, you know, than we have today.
Thanks, Georges. I'm gonna change the subject again now and then come to something that came up before. And this to Christian Koff to start us off. Does a DMO have a balance sheet? And if so, how should it use it?
Okay, maybe I can say a word on that. Yeah. So I actually believe that the sovereign does have a balance sheet. There are actually even accounting standards. They're called IPSAS, yeah, International Public Sector Accounting Standards. And Christian Wellner, we have a number of sovereign entities within Germany. It's a federal state, so it's made up of sovereigns. Yeah, one of them is the state of Hessen, where both of us reside, and the state of Hessen even publishes its balance sheets. So does you know, the government of Canada, New Zealand, and so forth. Yeah, so the sovereign does have a balance sheet, and in my view, and the thing is, you know, the DMOs, yeah, are the best experts on the sovereign balance sheet. Maria, Christian, you are the brains, yeah, when it comes to looking at the sovereign balance sheet. So my personal view is the future of sovereign debt management is asset liability management. Yeah. So you know, any corporate treasurer will have to look not only at the stream of revenues, but also at the stream of expenditures. Any pension fund will have to look at the liabilities that come due over time and the assets that he or she purchases in order to service those liabilities. And the same applies to the sovereign. So just looking at sovereign debt management in isolation, without looking at what happens on the asset side of the sovereign balance sheet, I think is too slim. And Christian told me a couple of years ago, we were discussing that the Finanzagentur has to go to the Budget Committee of Parliament once a year and explain what it has been doing. Because it's always stressful. We have to show that we've been saving money. And Christian has been saving a lot of money. I mean, a couple of years ago, 50 billion per year were used for interest payments. That has gone down tremendously. Yeah. But I think just minimizing the cost of debt is too narrow as an objective for sovereign debt management. You have to also look at the risk structure of the entire balance sheet, including the stream of assets. And this is why I personally think that there is a future. Look at emerging markets. Yeah, had they just been reducing the cost of borrowing, they would have all borrowed in dollars. They would have built massive currency mismatches. And look at Ukraine did it. Yeah, they borrowed in Swiss franc for yields of 1 or 2%. What's the consequence? They went bankrupt. Yeah. So, just focusing on reducing the cost of borrowing, I think, is too narrow. Actually, when you look at the Stockholm Principles on sovereign debt management that the IMF has developed, Principle 6 is very clear that you have to take the risks into account. Yeah, and I think that is crucial in developing the future of sovereign debt management. And I personally think that there is a case for state contingent debt that cushions the impact of economic shocks by designing the contracts, on the liability side.
Thank you, Christian. I'll come to Christian Wellner in a second. Maria, I'll give Christian a second to think about his response. Maria, maybe you could let us know what you think about the particularly on the asset liability management side.
Yeah, I see the argument line from an academical point of view, and I can follow them on this point of view, but I don't follow the line on the practical point of view. Of course, yeah, there is showing there are principles where it can show something. I would say something like a balance sheet, and it's already done. But the question is, can you work with it? And if it comes to the question, can you work with it? You have to rely to the law, and of course, the law can be changed. But as of now, I just repeated it on the other a few minutes ago. Expenditures are approved and given by the parliament, and there's no free float between asset side and liability side in the given context. You can argue, you can always change that, but this is the first point that I want to make. Yes, you can show something like a balance sheet, but the real value coming out of a classical asset liability management, I've done this in a bank as well for some years, is that you can work with both sides, and that is the point where it becomes critical, and where I would say it does not it's not a practical point of view as of now, perhaps. But I agree it is an interesting point to think about and perhaps to adjust some things. But as of now, I would say focusing on the liability side and doing the risk, and of course you have to take into account the risk concept is on the other side. I give you one example. I mean, the topic is the future of debt management, and you were talking about resilience, and I want you to sign the esteemed colleague from Great Britain, Sir Robert Stephen from the morning session. He said something like the approval of resilience has been done last year. I mean, we have seen the biggest, from a debt manager's perspective, it was horror year last year. I mean, he cited some numbers. I can add something for Germany as well. We started with a net debt planning of 0, gross borrowing of around about 188, and in April there was a plus of 155 only for budget law, plus additional 100 for economic stabilization fund, plus additional 100 for supporting KfW in that side. I mean, these are exploding numbers, and looking to your asset side and looking to what is, for example, what do we have from the real estate side, or what do we have as assets on it, doesn't help you at all in this kind of things. You have to get the money. Let's face the facts, and you get the money if you do and you stay on track. If you have established the most critical point is that you have done your homework and have an established capital market approach. And then you're safe. Then you can call your money market desk, and you can scale your established Bubble program up to the max or even below. You can scale your capital market approach, and then you can call the money. It doesn't the products you're talking about. Something like a GDP linker. We had this kind of crisis. GDP dropped dramatically, but this doesn't help you if your interest coupons are reduced in the next few years a little bit, and the redemption is also reduced in 5 or 10 years. You need the money now. So therefore, from a debt manager's perspective, the first line of defense is always keep the liquidity. And therefore, in this kind of view, looking to your asset side and what do you have for nice real estates or assets or universities or doesn't help you at all, and this kind of things. And I can just underline what Sir Robert mentioned. We had a very intensive year of in the last year, the most possible crisis for a debt manager, compared with a extremely high uncertainty. Nobody knows in April how much the volumes, if they will grow immediately.
Well, Chris, I'd like to just wrap up with that in a second, because we're going to run out of time. I just wanted to bring in Maria there. By the way, Kristen, your impassioned defense of the role of the Finanzkontor was really quite something, and I very much enjoyed hearing it. Maria, let me bring you in on this quickly.
Yes, on that I have only an anecdote to offer you. In this discussion of combining asset management with the liability management, was very alive in the middle of the first decade of the century, while there were many DMOs that seemed to have a too low debt that was difficult to ensure a life for the future to the debt managers. And there was a discussion on that. And in particular, such a model seemed to be possible and efficient, first of all, in small markets like New Zealand and similar, where, moreover, the legislation was already designed in a way to have such organization. But when the level of the debt, the market becomes more important, the activity have the frequency of issuance is very intense. This kind of good theoretical idea works less well, also because the professionalities needed are very different. So in the financial world, there is now a specialization that is showed how important it is to be a good player in your sector, and not always the skills are exactly the same to combine it. Nevertheless, I can say also that a small part of this exercise has been forced by the appetite for green bonds. And in this sense, the countries that have launched sovereign green bonds had been pushed to organize themselves in a way to have some way, as at least a partial asset liability management in this sense, but to extend it in a comprehensive manner, I believe is quite difficult in practical terms.
We've got about 5 or 10 minutes left, so just a couple of other things that I wanted to bring up. And one of you have Chris and Vella talked about the horror of 50 months ago. I wonder if the sequel, which is not quite such a horror story, but will still be quite difficult for you, will be the fact that at some point there will be a demand for yields to rise, and the impact that this will have on very, very heavily indebted countries that really simply cannot afford to see their interest burden go up in current circumstances. And we heard from Robert Stephen earlier that it's not the primary goal of a DMO to worry about the rate at which money is borrowed. It's first things first, you've got to borrow the money. But we also know that you may come under political pressure or other kinds of pressures as well in your roles? I'll come around the group on that, and come probably to the DMOs second. I'll start with Georges on that, and sort of like, you know, thinking from a macroeconomic point of view and from a business point of view for you as well.
Well, thanks, Clive. It's actually, it follows very nicely the discussion on whether the DMOs have or the governments have balance sheets, because I think really the essence of that question is, can we trust that in the future these governments are able to repay their the money? And I think two things. I want to bring a two-pronged answer to that. The first one is, us as institutional investors have full trust today. I think that trust has been also, supported by the action of the various central banks, obviously the ECB, in being there, whatever it takes, showing the support that is needed to ensure that collectively, as institutional investors, we trust these asset classes or these kind of issuances. And we will continue putting money in it, and so will other central banks in the world using the euro as a reserve currency, continue put their money in it, and banks will manage their liquidity putting their money in it. And therefore, by and large, you can say that kind of investor base, it's a very wide and important investor base, trusts that they will be good on that money. The sovereign issuers, will be good in that money. At the various interest rates, etc., the ECB will be here to make sure that everything works out. I think one thing we need to be mindful of is the attitude of retail investors, which we started seeing more recently. I mean, the talk about the trust in fiat money by retail investors, the fact that we've seen so many kind of jump on bandwagons of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ether, etc., with a number of them. The fact that that pool of money has reached at some stage $2 trillion, today probably $1 trillion, is telling us that there is some today fringe part of the investors that still decided to put $1 trillion away from everything we talk about here. Everything we know in financial space, etc., they've decided $1 trillion is just going somewhere totally dark to us. However much we may not like it as an asset class, it's a fact that that money has gone away from being put in green bonds issued by Finanzagentur in Italy and so many other equities and bonds, etc. And I think we just need to keep an eye on that fringe investor base, because that fringe investor base can grow and grow more and more uncomfortable with where we are. And I also think we need to be very careful of fringe politicians today talking about canceling debt. Now, one thing I learned about politics is never take fringe for granted, because you can always get a surprise by, and political outcomes of elections and what have you. And if you put two and two together, some saying, let's full monetize debt, albeit fringe, and some others saying, hold on, I'm not comfortable anymore owning, literally banknotes of euros or dollars, etc., let alone any other currencies. We need to be very mindful of those. We're still in the mainstream. I have no issues with that, but I just think we need to keep an eye on what's going on these fringes and make sure that that doesn't take us by surprise at some stage, and always kind of manage towards making sure those fringes are made always immaterial.
Okay, thanks, Georges. Christian Koch, maybe just on this, the future pressure for yields and the impact that will have on the DMOs and the markets.
Yes, thank you. So 2 or 3 comments. The first one I would make is that Christian Wellmer said, public debt management has stood the test last year, and it has proven to be resilient. No, I'm a bit more cautious here. I think that if your resilience depends on financial repression, then I'm not sure how resilient it really is. I mean, real interest rates are deeply negative, and they're held down by extremely aggressive central bank policies, And then I think the overall challenge or target of sovereign debt management, in my view, consists in aligning the sovereign's payment obligations with its capacity to pay. So the objective does not reside in reducing the borrowing cost to the minimum, but it resides in aligning the payment obligations with the payment capacity. Now, to your question, Clive, what happens if yields go up? So yields will only go up. And I'm talking about, especially about short-term yields. Yields will only go up when we have strong growth. We have very sticky obligations by the sovereign, long-term obligations, no? And when the marginal yields rise, they will rise very slowly. They will only drive up the average yields very slowly. And that will happen likely at a point in time where nominal GDP growth is quite high. So the famous R minus G equation, no? The difference between the nominal growth rate of the economy and the nominal interest rate of the sovereign debt will remain deeply negative in an environment of rising yields, because it will be an environment of rising growth. So this could actually be an environment which is not dangerous for the sovereign. It will be a requirement which will lead to gradual decline in the debt to GDP ratio because of the stickiness of the sovereign's obligations. I'm personally much more concerned about another downturn, that may come from somewhere which we don't predict. And we haven't got the monetary policy tools to accommodate further. And I think that it would be prudent by the sovereign to buy insurance against such a downturn. And one way to buy insurance is to go for state contingent sovereign obligations.
Thanks, Christian. And look, I'm hoping that we'll have a follow-up session on this where we can get into things like that we haven't had time to today. We're very short of time now. So Christian Wellner, just on that issue of rising interest rates, the battle against inflation, the level of sovereign debt, maybe just a couple of minutes, please.
Yeah. I try to make it short. First of all, Christian Kopf said we were successful in reducing the interest rate cost from 50 billion to below 10. This was not our success. That was a part of the market reaction. So first of all, full stop of that. But when it comes to the other side, this is the part where risk management comes into the part. So first of all, get the money. Second part, have a balanced portfolio to be able to fulfill all your obligations. And if you look to the portfolios of our peers and colleagues around the world, if you look to the UK portfolio, it is completely different from that which Fred is running in the United States or something like that. So anybody has found its balance between. So if you look to Germany, we have scaled the build program, so the short end of the curve, as well as the long end of the curve. If you look to our history, so this is some kind of not bullet. It's a kind of wing strategy where both sides are addressed. So you have the risk side with the raising yields on the high side, and you have the possibility of low cost, and we're talking about taxpayers' money, and being sure for another downturn on the short end of the curve. So this is a classic. This is our core job, finding the balance between risks and costs, and therefore this will be the core job also in the future as well.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Maria, last word to you, please, particularly on that tension that we might see around rising yields and interest rates and inflation. Obviously, Italy is sometimes in the center of some of these discussions.
Yes, with our debt, this is the cost. But again, I believe that having a good balancing in the different segment of the curve is the best way, selecting time by time what is the most opportune design of the curve is the only solution. Another solution is probably to try to exploit every possible niches of the market. For example, in Italy, there has been an interesting test on that has been the launch of a bond exclusively addressed to retail investors. That is has a step up rates, and it is also related with the premium at redemption, linked to the performance of the GDP during the life of the bond. There has been 3 issuance of this bond, 2 in the 2021 this year, and there is a possibility for the investors to obtain a premium if related to the performance of the GDP.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I mean, we'll run out of time. It's good to end on a positive note, because I saw when you talked about GDP linkers, Christian Koch put his thumb up. So there's obviously some willing demand for that. For now, I just want to first of all thank the panelists for joining us on this discussion. Thank you all for a really good discussion. We hope we can do more of this in the future. So it now falls to me just to give a few closing remarks. We've been together now for a little over 4 hours. We've heard from Johannes Hahn. We've seen that a hint may be that the end date for Next Gen EU of 2026 may be more the end of the beginning, that this might be a starting point for something that goes on for some time. We've heard from Siegfried Ruhl that the Next Gen EU is ready to come to the market, and what a lot it's got to do. 800 billion over the course of the next 5 and a bit years. That's 150 billion a year. He's talked about building in flexibility to adapt to market conditions. So we don't yet know, even though we try to get him to tell us where the first issue will come on the maturity curve. But we're looking forward to seeing where that will happen. We've heard about the need for sovereigns to coordinate and to work together to ensure a smooth pipeline of issuance. And I think that's something that's becoming more and more important as borrowing needs remain high, and it also is such a big new issuer enters the markets. And we've seen that sovereign debt needs may be declining, but they are still extraordinarily high. Central banks are often now the biggest owners of government bonds, and they must be wary of when they no longer have a stabilizing effect, but have a distorting one instead. The good news is our panelists across both panels, I think, don't just hope, they expect that the ECB will provide the platform for an orderly return to normal. I think it's really important at the end of a day like today to just remember that the DMOs have done a remarkable job in the most extraordinary circumstances. There has been no playbook for them to follow here. And the reassurance that they provided to the markets and to investors in particular, which Marcus on our first panel described as overwhelming, was undoubtedly crucial. There's no doubt the return to normality will be difficult. DMOs face enormous challenges, and they need dialogue and constructive actions between them and their governments, but also with the markets, and particularly with investors and investment banks to achieve that. The biggest challenge, as we were just discussing, will probably be to keep the interest burden on these heavily indebted countries as low as possible for countries that can't yet afford a big rise in yield, even if inflation threatens to return. And even if the actual yield at which they're sold is not actually the primary part of the mandate, as Robert from the UK DMO said. In this, they'll need to rely on their advisors and their banks that help them access the market through auction or syndication. As Siegfried from the NGU said, I thought this was great. He said a group of lead managers is like a soccer team. You can't just pick 11 goalkeepers, even if they're all the best players. You have to have a broad group of expertise to help you. But it might also be worth remembering for some of the issuers that banks do need to be paid for their sovereign debt operations if they're going to fulfill that function. We think that cooperation and resilience will go hand in hand as sovereign issues respond to, and perhaps even take the lead in, as we've heard today, finance's fight against climate change. And that's notwithstanding the challenges of digitalization and what the advent of central bank digital currencies might mean for capital markets and sovereign borrowers in particular. And this form of dialogue with all the different parts of the market will be at the heart of OMFIF's new Sovereign Debt Institute that we've launched today. There'll be a lot more events like this across the world, but not just in Europe. We plan to have constant engagement with DMOs through interviews, podcasts, videos, bringing the OMFIF Investor Network to them. And you saw the OMFIF Investor Network in our presentation of the results on asset allocation earlier. And this can be particularly relevant to issues, for example, in the emerging markets. We say OMFIF is where the public and private sectors meet to shape the future of finance. I think we've done that over the last 4 hours. We'd like to do more. My thanks to every single person who has contributed today, all of our speakers, all of you that joined us in the audience, my team for helping put this together. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and see you at a Sovereign Debt Institute event soon. Thank you very much indeed.